The year 2002 began with a deceptive layer of pristine white snow covering the rough streets of Nottingham. While most of the country slept in the warmth of holiday traditions, the residents of the St. Anne's estate faced a much colder reality. A young boy named Leo crept downstairs early, hoping to see what the morning had brought him. Instead of a winter wonderland, his eyes fell upon a dark, irregular shape disrupting the white surface of his front garden. Steam rose from the dark mass, contrasting sharply with the freezing air of the Nottingham morning. The boy realized the shape was a man dressed in a heavy coat that was rapidly turning a deep crimson. Panic surged through the small house as the boy's mother was awakened by his stifled screams. She lunged for the telephone, her fingers trembling as she dialed the emergency services. Outside, the man's breath came in ragged, wet gasps that echoed against the silent brick walls of the estate. He was a known figure in the local underworld, a man whose presence usually commanded fear rather than pity. Within minutes, the silence of Christmas morning was shattered by the shrill wail of sirens approaching from the city center. Paramedics swarmed the lawn, their bright yellow jackets a stark contrast to the grim scene. Despite their frantic efforts, the victim's eyes glazed over as the life drained out of him into the Nottingham soil. He died without uttering a single word, leaving the identity of his attacker a cold mystery. Detectives arrived soon after, cordoning off the area with yellow tape that fluttered in the freezing wind. They found shell casings hidden under the light dusting of snow, indicating a professional hit. In the world of Nottingham's gangs, this wasn't just a murder, it was a loud and clear message. Neighbors watched through cracked blinds, their faces etched with a familiar mask of silence and fear. No one had seen anything, or at least that is what they told the officers who knocked on their doors. The victim was identified as Marcus the Ghost Thorne, a mid-level enforcer for the city's most powerful syndicate. Thorne had been seen arguing with his associates only hours before the shooting occurred. As the body was loaded into the van, the snow began to fall again, as if trying to wash away the evidence. The local police chief vowed to find the killers, but the streets knew better. Rumors circulated that Thorne had been planning to turn informant to save himself from a long prison sentence. His betrayal had been sniffed out by the very people he once called brothers. Years passed, and the case of the Christmas morning hit grew colder with every winter. The St. Anne's estate moved on, but the trauma remained etched in the walls of the small house where it started. Leo, now a young man, could never forget the sight of the steam rising from the dying man. He spent his nights scouring old news clippings and online forums for any scrap of information. A decade after the crime, an anonymous letter arrived at the local newspaper office. It contained details about the murder that had never been released to the public. The letter mentioned a third man who had been standing in the shadows that morning. This individual was not a gang member, but someone with a badge and a reputation for justice. The implication of police corruption sent shockwaves through the remaining members of the investigative team. Why would a police officer want Marcus Thorne dead on a Christmas morning? Leo received a phone call from a blocked number, telling him to stop digging if he valued his life. A black sedan began following him, its tinted windows hiding the identity of the driver. He realized that the mystery of the dying man on his lawn was far from buried. The betrayal went much deeper than local gang rivalries, reaching into the heart of the city's power structure. Just as Leo thought he found a lead, he discovered his front door standing wide open, exactly like that morning 10 years ago. Inside his flat, the television was on, playing a news report about a new victim found in the same estate. A shadow moved across the wall behind him, and the smell of gunpowder filled the small room. Before he could turn around, a familiar voice whispered a name that shouldn't have been known by anyone alive. The echoing whisper of that forbidden name lingered in the cold London air like a death sentence. Dr. Sarah Miller clutched her medical charts so hard the paper began to crinkle under her grip. She turned slowly to face the darkness of the hallway where the voice had originated. A man stepped into the light wearing a tailored track jacket and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. This was not a patient seeking a routine checkup or a cosmetic procedure. He dropped a heavy envelope onto the reception desk with a dull, sickening thud. Inside were photographs of Sarah's children playing in the park just 2 days ago. The man, known in the streets as Viper, demanded a weekly protection fee that would bankrupt her practice. Sarah felt the room spinning as she realized her private life had been meticulously dismantled. Viper leaned in close and whispered that the police would only make the situation more permanent. For 3 weeks, Sarah lived in a state of constant, paralyzing paranoia. She watched her bank account drain as the demands from the gang grew more frequent. One evening, a former patient saw her distress and slipped a handwritten note across the counter. The note contained only a location and a name that carried the weight of legend. Sarah drove to a derelict boxing gym under the arches of South London. The smell of sweat and old leather filled her lungs as she stepped inside the ring's glow. Sitting on a stool was an older man with silver hair and hands that looked like they had carved mountains. This was Arthur the King Penhaligon, a man who had once ruled the city with an iron fist. He listened to Sarah's story without uttering a single word for 10 minutes. Arthur finally stood up, his presence filling the entire cavernous room. He told her that some people in this city had forgotten the old codes of conduct. The next morning, Viper returned to the dental surgery with a swagger of unearned confidence. He found Sarah sitting calmly behind her desk, but she was not alone. The color drained from Viper's face as he recognized the legendary figure in the room. Arthur didn't raise his voice, yet the air seemed to vibrate with his hidden power. He informed the young gangster that the debt was not only settled but reversed. Viper was ordered to return every penny he had stolen from Sarah by sunset. The extortionist fled the building, his reputation shattered in a single moment. Sarah felt a weight lift off her chest that she thought would be there forever. She thanked Arthur, offering him any dental service he might ever need in return. Arthur simply nodded and told her that the city was changing for the worse. He warned her that even though Viper was gone, the shadows of London were growing longer. As Sarah watched him leave, she realized how fragile her sense of security truly was. The incident left a permanent mark on her soul, a reminder of the darkness lurking just beneath the surface. She began to notice the small, strange occurrences in the neighborhood that she once ignored. Rumors began to circulate that Viper's gang was not acting alone. A new, more organized syndicate was moving into the territory Arthur had long since abandoned. Late that night, Sarah received a phone call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end wasn't Viper, but someone far more chilling. They didn't ask for money. They asked about a girl named Suzanne Capper. Suddenly, Sarah's front door creaked open, even though she had locked it 3 times. Sarah froze as the door creaked open, realizing the shadows of the street had finally followed her home. But as the light caught the intruder's face, the scene shifted to another time and another girl who faced a far worse fate. In December of 1992, the air in Manchester felt heavy with a looming sense of dread. Suzanne Capper was just 16 years old, a girl whose life was supposed to be just beginning. She sought comfort in a group of friends, unaware that their friendship was a mask for something much darker. The group took her to a house on Langworthy Road, a place that would soon become a chamber of horrors. Inside those walls, the rules of society ceased to exist as her captors began their systematic torment. For days, Suzanne was subjected to unimaginable cruelty that defied any sense of human empathy. The neighbors heard strange noises and music played at a deafening volume to drown out her cries. Her former friends sat around casually discussing their next move while Suzanne suffered in silence. She was kept in a cupboard, stripped of her dignity and her basic human rights. Every second felt like an eternity as the physical and mental abuse escalated beyond comprehension. The perpetrators acted with a level of callousness that shocked even the most seasoned investigators. Suzanne tried to escape several times, but the tight-knit group always pulled her back into the darkness. After several days of horror, the group decided they could no longer keep her in the house. They drove her to a remote area near Stockport, far away from any help or witnesses. In a final act of cowardice, they set Suzanne on fire and left her for dead in a lonely ditch. Against all odds, Suzanne managed to crawl out of the ditch and walk toward a distant light. She was discovered by a passer-by who could hardly believe the sight of the broken girl before him. Even in her final moments of strength, Suzanne was able to name those who had done this to her. She fought for her life in the hospital for several days, but her injuries were simply too severe to overcome. Suzanne Capper passed away, leaving a family devastated and a nation in a state of utter shock. The police investigation moved with lightning speed, fueled by the name Suzanne had courageously provided. One by one, the individuals responsible were hunted down and brought into custody. The trial that followed exposed the depravity of the group and the lack of remorse they held for their actions. The details released during the proceedings were so graphic that many in the gallery were moved to tears. The lead investigator described the case as the most disturbing example of human cruelty he had ever seen. Ultimately, the jury returned guilty verdicts for all the primary suspects involved in the murder. Life sentences were handed down, ensuring that Suzanne's tormentors would never walk free again. The community held a vigil for Suzanne, lighting candles to reclaim the streets from the darkness. Her mother spoke of the void left in their lives, a hole that no amount of justice could ever truly fill. Laws were later reviewed to better protect vulnerable teenagers from falling into similar predatory traps. Suzanne's bravery in her final hours became a symbol of the human spirit's resilience against evil. We look back at these stories not to dwell on the horror, but to honor the victims who suffered through them. The case of Suzanne Capper remains a haunting reminder that the people we trust can sometimes be the most dangerous. But justice, though it may take time, eventually shines a light into even the deepest shadows of the street. Sarah, now safe in her own home, realized that the kingpin's intervention had saved her from a similar cycle of violence. She understood that while the world is full of predators, there are also those who stand against the tide of chaos. The shadows had retreated, leaving behind a renewed sense of peace and a promise of a better tomorrow. As the credits roll, we remember Suzanne not for her death, but for the light she left behind in the hearts of those who loved her.